Hi there, it's Kevin with RogueDeckBuilder.com here just with a little bit of a kind of video log update about some community talk, I guess. I think I'm going to try to do more of these, just kind of fill the dead space in between when I do videos for like Market Monday and just a little deck techs. And really get back to doing gameplay. Gameplay is something that I think works better on like a Twitch type setting or a live stream setting. And with the swim season, it's just not possible right now to find a good time. Usually when I edit videos is when everyone's either at work or school, and then I go to work when everyone else is watching YouTube videos, or usually I'm sleeping at that time since I get up at 5:30 in the morning, which is no fun, but yeah, it's starting to get a little bit buff. So I guess you get something out of being a early morning weight room with the swim team. Anywho, so I think that these are the type of videos I like doing the most. So if you don't enjoy them, just feel free to keep watching the Market Mondays or the deck techs if you enjoy those better. I'll try not to flood the channel too much with this, but I think that there's a lot to be said. At least there's going to be a lot more voices out there, especially from more of the brewer side of the community, more of the YouTube side of the community. Otherwise, it just gets in those echo chamber of the pros and the more prolific people or even outspoken people in the Magic community. So this basically is from Sam Stoddard. He's one of the main game designers over at Wizards of the Coast. He says, on a scale of 1 to 10, what do you think of the current standard environment now that it is about over? 10 being the best, of course, 1 being the worst. And we have a ton of responses, especially from the pros. And I'm going to weigh in on what I feel the scale of Kaladesh standard has been. I'm not as gray about this or basically as a Debbie Downer as most of the people are, but I do agree with a lot of the sentiments here and the opinions here by most of the people that have responded. So standard, my favorite standard, let's first talk about my favorite standard. My favorite standard by far was Return to Ravnica Innistrad. Maybe I'm a little bit nostalgic because it's when I got really back into competitive. I actually got competitive right before then in the Scars of Mirrodin block with Innistrad, and that format was absolutely terrible. It was dominated by 3 decks. If you think that right now is bad, that was even worse. Games, you basically knew by turn 3 who was going to win the game. Delver would lock you out, Infect would just kill you by then, and if the few other decks that could somehow compete, you just know that the game was over. There was very little decisions to be made after. I'll argue, I never played really Delver versus Delver. Some people, apparently that was a good high-intensity skill game, but since I wasn't a Delver player, playing against Delver by like turn 2 or turn 3, if I had to Thalia out turn 2, a lot of times I know that I beat Delver. If I didn't, I know I'd lose to that. I'd get kind of Vapor Snagged and then just kind of the Mana Leak locked, and then it'd just be a few turns and the Delver would kill me. And Infect, same thing. If I got off a good draw early, I know that I could race or even lock out Infect by getting a Malera, etc., etc., etc. So at that time, I played a green-white tokens, or actually green-white ramp list. It wasn't so much tokens, as more ramp than anything. And anywho, when Innistrad and Return to Ravnica, I felt even by the end of the season, it had not been solved. And there was a good self-regulating rotation within the standard season. What I mean by that is when one deck would become popular, the counter deck would then go on the rise and counter that deck. And it was beyond that though. It was a very, very wide open, diverse metagame, and it felt like you could play any strategy and be successful. Let me tell you why that is very important. So that means you could run a diverse amount of cards. It was still basically synergy decks, combo decks, mid-range decks, aggro decks, control. I mean, the main archetypes were there. That didn't change. So decks might feel the same the way that you're playing them, but you could play a completely different mid-range deck and be successful with it. It wasn't like the stock mid-range deck and you had to go with the stock mid-range deck or the stock aggro deck. Now, this standard format, I would say, is diverse. There are a lot of different decks, but unfortunately, there's a lot of patterns, very specific patterns with this standard. And it seems like now there's 2 ways to be successful in the format. One is to be running Emrakul, and the other is running Smuggler's Copter. And so even in decks you've seen me being successful with, my black-white or my black-green tokens decks is still to this day very, very successful. I've been able to, I was just goofing around the other day with it and 4-1 two dailies or two leagues, competitive leagues with the black green tokens. But a huge key part of the success was when I started including Smuggler's Copter, because the turn 2 Smuggler's Copter is such a very, very important draw against Blue White Flash or other Copter decks. It kind of just basically counters their Copter, and then it becomes who can basically outplay the other person or outdraw the other person from that point on. But when I wasn't playing the Copter, I felt like I was very vulnerable to Copter. And it's kind of sad when the best way to beat a Copter is to play a Copter. And so also now with the metagame shifting to Aetherworks Marvel, with Emrakul, the turn 4 looming Emrakul that everyone is sick of is definitely it's really not helping diversity whatsoever. So what I liked about Back to the Innistrad Return to Ravnica is I was very successful with a plethora of different decks. I was successful with Epic Experiment combo. I was which was like a Past in Flames Reforged the Soul type combo based deck in that environment. As well, I was very successful with a Hellrider combo deck that used the Hellrider and a card whenever a creature dealt damage, you got to draw a card. I can't remember what that was, but I was wildly successful with a ton of different decks. I even made a Blast of Genius Worm deck that wasn't, I wouldn't say, like horribly competitive or really competitive, but it was a good 2-2 deck. It was something that you could have fun with and still win some games. So let's just compare this standard with past standards, and then I'll give a rating for this standard. And really, yeah, I think that adding my input here is beneficial because I come at it at a different angle than just a professional player or a more, like I said, a more prolific player here. So I like cards that add, of course, very good synergies and, to me, an entertaining way to brew decks. I don't care about the most competitive deck. In fact, I like to beat the most competitive deck by my own unique strategy. That's what I get out of rogue decking. That's why I play rogue decking. And I like to attack the metagame uniquely. So I like formats in which you can do that. So the worst standard, I would say, was definitely Theros block. Theros and Return to Ravnica was probably my bottom of the... If you really want to see me whining about a format, go back to those videos. I hated Standard then. And it's probably why I got into Modern so much. And Modern right now, I think, is just a pile of garbage. I refuse to play Modern, and maybe that's why I'm looking a little bit more positively at Standard right now, because I'm still having a lot more fun playing Standard than I am playing that horrible, awful format we call Modern. So, and this is coming from a traditionally Modern player, someone who played Soul Sisters to a PTQ finish. They got me onto a Pro Tour. I 5-0'd many dailies with Soul Sisters. 5-0'd many dailies in competitive leagues with Scred. A lot of brews that I've done in Modern were very successful, but it's come to the point where I think that format has just become a pile of garbage with the combo decks. So, anywho, Theros block was riddled. Theros in Return to Ravnica was riddled with basically 3 decks. You had Supreme Verdict Control, you had Burn, or you had Mono Black Mono Black Devotion. I guess Mono Blue you could consider being in there as well. So 4 decks were really the go-to decks, and they were dominant throughout the entire season. And it was very, very hard to build a deck that can compete with the overall kind of archetype of the heavy control with the Supreme Verdict decks, the heavy control and God Draw with the Mutavault Packrat Thoughtseize deck, the Mono Blue Devotion that just spit out a bunch of things very quickly, and then the Burn deck that didn't care what you were doing. They were just going to keep slinging 4 damage spells at your face. So to attack the metagame uniquely was very, very tough. You could not build a deck that could... You could build a deck that could compete against 1 and then get destroyed by the other 3. And it was just one of those formats where I grew tired very quickly of brewing and became very frustrated. So then after the Return to Ravnica and Theros, so RTR rotated, we had Theros Cons, which was okay, I would say. There was the Siege Rhino infestation and the Abzan infestation, but it felt like there was a lot of cards that I could play. We were still kind of struggling from the Thoughtseize. Thoughtseize was then, now it was just try to rip something out of their hand for the Siege Rhino. And Abzan definitely was a very oppressive deck, but it did seem like there was enough diversity in the format that you could build your different decks to compete with it. I remember building what at the time there was like the even Chromantiflayer type decks that I was successful with. I'd have to go back and see just the how many brews, but it was an I would give that format. So the one before that, like I said, the Theros and Return to Ravnica, I would give a 1. I hated that standard format, and if that was the norm going forward, I probably just wouldn't play Magic, at least standard is concerned. I would give the rotated, the Khans of Tarkir and the Theros block, I would give it about a 5. It was pretty average, but there were definitely cards that were so pushed. They really pushed the clans in the whatever you want to call them, guilds or clans, in the Khans of Tarkir. The 3-color cards were all so more powerful. It seemed like Theros was wedged in between two extremely powerful sets, and unfortunately, it just didn't. It had a few support cards, like the Thoughtseize or the Nykthos Shrine of Nyx, but overall the other cards seemed very underwhelming compared to both Return to Ravnica cards and Khans cards. So yes, we did get beat up by besides Heroic kind of paired very well with Prowess. It really was a Siege Rhino environment. In fact, a lot of people, I remember MTG Goldfish made a video on, or just did a deck just with Siege Rhinos. I think that was actually the next rotation when you were able to bring in like Origins, or no, Bring to Light. Yeah, so it was after we rotated into the next set into the Oath of the Gatewatch. So I would put Oath of the Gatewatch and block, or the Zendikar block and Khans as probably a 3. I think that was a worse format that we're playing in right now, just because of how efficient the mana was, and again, just how many cards were just so much more over the top compared to other cards. We had the Collected Company decks that were just value city, especially when the Reflector Mage came out. It just really put that deck over the top. And then we had the Jace decks, that the Jeskai Black and Mardu Green especially, that just played pure good stuff, and it just stifled creativity. And I thought it was a very lackluster format, but I still felt like I could be semi-creative. The oppressive cards did not nearly seem as oppressive as this block, as the Emrakul / the Smuggler's Copter. So still, though, it was very boring. I complained about how the design team, even right off the bat, thought that there wouldn't be, that the Battle for Zendikar lands would not be a problem with the fetch lands, because they really they're just okay. They don't pair very well with fetch lands. But it was a slower format. There wasn't really a lot of dominant aggro-based decks, and so there's a lot of time to actually establish. Who cared if you first turn fetch land for comes into play tap land twice in a row? Your mana was fixed at that point, and the fetch lands worked very well into Delve, and it was just a very easy format to flip Jace, a very easy format to go Crackling Doom into Siege Rhino. I remember one of the games that I played went the Fiery Impulse into Jace, into Crackling Doom, into Siege Rhino, and I was like, wow, let's hit every color in the game of Magic on time. And so that format, I think, was an incredible mistake, and in comparison, I do like this standard better. So then we had the Origins, and the fetch lands rotated out, and then we had the Origins Dragons of Tarkir paired up with the Battle for Zendikar, and then we got the Eldritch Moon decks, and then it was really the Collected Company decks were extremely oppressive, just because the fact that Collected Company, either when it was at first paired with Westvale Abbey type cards, and they'll draw as a displacer, and then later on paired with the Bant colors with the Reflector Mage Spell Queller at all. We remember that format. I mean, that wasn't too far off. Just the oppressiveness of Collected Company, and it did still feel like you could. I would give that one probably a 5 as well, because it seemed like there was enough diversity. You could attack the metagame at some unique ways. Cards, there were definitely some decent cards that were able to rip out that strategy or put out some aggressive cards versus it. I had a decent time in that format. I felt like that I had enough decks even by the time that the rotation time was coming around. I didn't even feel like there was a card besides Collect the Company that I really wanted to get out of the format. Now, going back to the formats before that, there were absolutely cards. I used to do a top 10 list of cards I'm glad rotated. I was going to sit down and do it for the last rotation, but it really came down to Collected Company. Collected Company was the only card that I really felt in that slot, possibly Jace, that was just a bit too oppressive. So again, I think that was fine. It was about a 5 of a format. There was plenty of mistakes, but there was enough enjoyment and enough room for innovation. So now it leads us on to this rotation. So we have the Battle for Zendikar, we have the Battle for Zendikar block, we have the Shadows of Innistrad block, and now we have Kaladesh. And at first, the format came out swinging with the Smuggler's Copters decks being the hyper-aggressive Mardu vehicles or red-white vehicles, and everyone was like, this deck can't be beat, and the Pro Tour came around and just showed how vulnerable that strategy was, and that went away. We have a kind of self-rotating standard, so I don't think the standard is necessarily solved. It might be the time that Aetherworks Marvel has just found the perfect combination that does well versus U-White Flash as well as Green-Black Delirium, and there's still enough players that are still stubbornly holding on to Green-Black Delirium and U-White Flash to keep kind of the vehicle decks down, or some of these other decks that can push through the Aetherworks Marvel. So maybe the format is solved now, even though we still do see there is a healthy amount of diverse decks. Unfortunately, though, the diversity is kind of a sham, because like I said before, they're just usually, it's either your go-to Copter tempo deck, your go-to Copter aggro deck, or your go-to let's try to get Emrakul out Ishkanah and Emrakul out as quickly as possible to stop that tempo. Every once in a while, you still do see some more unique decks like the Metalwork. The Metalwork Summonings. You still see a few decks that run Torrential Gearhulk. You still see a few decks every now and again that even run the Colossus, and there still is some successful things out there. But now it does seem to be the big three. I'd even say big four: the Mardu vehicles, the Aetherworks Marvel, Red-Green Aetherworks Marvel, and Green-Black Delirium and U-White Flash have really pretty much defined the format. And so I still have enjoyment, though. I still have a good experience while playing this standard. It doesn't feel like during the Scars Mirrodin block where I knew I was going to die by turn 2 or turn 3. Yes, games are very easy to protect against both Green-Black Delirium and Aetherworks Marvel, because they're both incredibly redundant. And I would say the same thing about U-White Flash. U-White Flash is just insanely redundant. But there does still seem to be some wiggle room for innovation, creativity, and a little bit of diversity. So I would give this, probably on a scale of 1 to 10, I would give it a 4. So let's check out what some other players, and we'll read some of the comments and I'll try to respond to them. So Brian Kibler, the Hearthstone player, ex-Magic Pro, I haven't played much, but no desire to play the format anymore after the Pro Tour, when I'm usually excited to experiment. He gives it a 3. Kai Bude says, Copter is stupid, Emrakul is stupid, and prevents the format from being diverse. Won't get more than a 3 from me either. Now, I really want to kind of reiterate this, because this is my problem, and it's just sad that both those cards exist. Emrakul is bad design. Let me repeat that. Emrakul was terrible design. It is stifling any sort of creativity with the 7 and 6 drops. Why would you ever play a 6 drop right now in the format? Any 6 drop, you name it. Why the hell would you ever play it when Delirium is such a powerful mechanic? You cannot do anything in its graveyards right now. It's absolutely ridiculous. You cannot affect it. So it's very easy to get Emrakul out on time at turn 6 or turn 7, and that is just backbreaking for that to happen. And same thing with Copter. Why the hell would you play any 2-drop over Smuggler's Copter? Smuggler's Copter just does everything. It's sad, too, because I think this should have been a specific card that would help out like Delirium-based decks, or Madness-based decks, or even Vehicles-based decks, but not completely transcend every deck. Like, we'll just throw it in everything, which is literally what Copter is doing. My Westfield Abbey deck proves that. I'll just throw it in a tokens deck, and it's my most powerful card in the deck. Let me repeat that. It's the most powerful card in my Westfield Abbey deck. I never, ever am disappointed by seeing a copter in my hand. It helps fix your. You can keep greedy hands like 2-land hands because then you can loot into what you need. It works perfectly off cards like Thraben Inspector for U-White Flash or even Reflector Mage, so you can curve perfectly, put out a Reflector Mage, and still attack in with a 3/3. Copter should have been a 2/1. Or it shouldn't have had flying. It made Sylvan Advocate so terrible. That card was a format-defining card, but everything just looks so stupid as a ground creature looking at a copter just bash you over the face turn after turn and turn again and again. I'd even say Kalatos is just terrible versus the Smuggler's Copter. And so it's just made a format where Harness Lightning and Grasp of Darkness has to be the go-to card to keep the Copter down. Again, this is a card that I think could have been as a 2/1 and would have been fair, and then the Black-Red Madness decks would have loved it. Some of the more aggressive Delirium decks would have loved it because it would still be a nice little looter scooter, would still get the job done, but would have a lot of ways just to deal with it. Just to flat out, 2 damage per turn is light years away than 3 damage flying per turn. Also, a 2/1 could easily be chump blocked by any like 1/1 Mausoleum Wanderer, for example. So that was a bad design card. It was too powerful what it did. If you compare it to every other vehicle, it's just light years ahead of the other ones. And it made for a very uninteresting format. So let's go back to so this person says, clarification, is standard now more or less diverse in your opinion than collected company standard? I would say it's probably more diverse, but not by much. Again, you could probably put every deck into 3 or 4 archetypes. You have Marvel, you have Delirium, Green-Black Delirium, which are actually play very similarly. I don't even know if you would consider those decks very different. Or because they're both value decks, you just try to continue to cast multiple cards, multiple Ishkanahs per game, and you have a few different angles with Aetherwork Marvel than you do with Green Black Delirium and vice versa. Then you have the U-White Flash, which I would consider a tempo-based deck, and then you would have your Copter aggro of choice, whether it be Mardu vehicles, Black-Red zombies, those type of strategies. All right, so Jeff Hooglin, who is a known complainer, worse than I am, says the games where Emrakul doesn't show up are a solid 7. The one where she does are 3 at best. This is kind of the exact same thing that I like. Some of those Marvel decks, they'd be such interesting games to play, or they're actually very fun to play when Emrakul does not hit off of a Marvel. When they either flat out miss or they just find something like Chandra, that doesn't seem backbreaking. The games where they get that turn 7 off Delirium with Green-Black to find the Emrakul, when they find the turn 4 Emrakul, are just, they're just terrible, terrible. They feel just so one-sided. And let me reiterate what I'm talking about Copter and Emrakul. A lot of people, I've read some articles saying, well, if Emrakul didn't exist, then Green Black Delirium and Aetherworks Marvel would not exist. I call complete BS there. I think Green Black Delirium is fine without it. That is the epitome of a bad design card. If you take away the card and the deck still works, yet people still want to throw it in every deck, that is a bad design card. And Green Black Delirium would be perfectly playable without Emrakul. You'd have to find another top-end finisher or just go out of Ishkanah. In my opinion, they'd probably go back to Sultai and go back to the Sultai Emerge type strategy rather than go into Emrakul, because then you could just kill Ishkanahs to tap down creatures and attack in, and maybe just eventually just get enough Liliana then cast Ishkanah, and you can take over the game that way. Speaking of Copter, U-White Flash just proves how bad design Copter is, because U-White Flash would still exist and still be good without Copter. And so across the board, I think if we got rid of Copter, all of the archetypes would be just fine. And then we could see where the format takes us. I think I proved it. You can go over to Gathering Magic and you can watch my Angel Aetherworks Marvel deck where I did not use Emrakul's, and it worked phenomenally well, but it didn't feel so OP to hit. Like, I had to work for it. It just wasn't just, close my eyes and hope for an Emrakul. So I think that is it too late to ban? Yes, probably so. I think that Wizards just needs to be careful with those type of cards and stop. The problem is that it is tough, because in the past they've nerfed specific colors or specific strategies. I'm thinking, what is the Ravnica, the Dimir Guild? the Cypher. Cypher was completely, they're so worried about Cypher being like overpowered that they made it just incredibly awful. And maybe that's what they were thinking about Emrakul. Emrakul must be playable. I think that Seth from MG Goldfish put it best. The Emrakul should have just stated Delirium, reduce the mana cost by 4, and then it capped at that. Because then you're still dealing with a 9 mana converted mana cost card. That'd make the Marvel decks a lot worse because they would have to just rely on hitting Emrakul. Otherwise, they'd have to cast it for 9. There are so many matchups versus the Aetherworks Marvel deck where they get stuck with Emrakuls in their hand and end up casting it for 6 or 7 because they have a Woodweaver's Puzzle Knot in the graveyard. They have a Vessel in the graveyard. So there's Artifact and enchantment, and they've hit like a creature, instant, and land as well, or even a planeswalker in the bin off of the vessel, and now they're just casting Emrakul for 7, and that seems almost as unfair as hitting that off of an Aetherworks Marvel. So we'll scroll down. Says he even has what Jeff Hooglin says, even the turn 8 Emrakul is fairly uninteresting. Generally makes every decision made that game meaningless. And that's the same thing, like holding up removal is so bad versus Emrakul decks. There's so many times where I can't even unload it. Like there's no opportunity, and then it gets used against me. So 3 is pretty low ceiling when frequently getting Mindslavered is a defining element of the experiment. So this is Patrick Sullivan, another very, very popular pro. He's been around forever. So I think that's kind of the consensus. What's less than a 1 but higher than a 0 from Todd Anderson? So 3 from Sam Party, 3 from Jim Davis. These are both known grinders. They're both, pretty high up on the pro scene. 4, format needs more graveyard hate, better planeswalk removal, and any format sucks when only 10% of the cards are playable. This is a huge complaint that I have as well about the format. They gave us 0 ways to work with energy. So I play a game called Dice Masters, and there's a card in the format called Elf Thief, and I'm hoping they print it for the next set. Elf Thief basically, energy, like the way energy works in Magic is kind of similar to how energy works in Dice Masters, because you keep it until your next turn, and it sits in like this mana pool, but you know what your opponent has. You know what they're capable of doing, and so it's more than just tapping lands. It's almost like you know what their hand is as well in the game. And energy feels very similar to that. And there's a card called Elf Thief when it enters the battlefield, or when fielded in this case for all you Dice Masters players. It's able to take an energy. And that is such a defining card just because it prevents people from trying to stockpile it and go for these big, like, rampy plays. And so if there's an Elf Thief similar card that drained your opponent's energy pool, or maybe even a burn card that used it against them, then I think that would solve a lot of Aetherwork Marvels, just being able to stockpile a lot of energy. The other way, Graveyard Hate would actually absolutely be able to deal with Emrakul. I think that even if we would have had a better way, like a better Slaughter Games type mechanic, I can't stand Lost Legacy. Lost Legacy is just terrible in the format where artifacts are just as defining as anything else. And also, Lost Legacy, drawing your opponent a card if they happen to have it in their hand, is such a horrible experience too. I'd love to bring it in control and then rip out their glimmers, but they get to draw a card off of it if they had any of them in their hands. So I am not a fan of not having any way to deal with both graveyards or to deal with the energy. And at the same point too, I think that it is a little bit rough to deal with the Copters. Like, you have to go all in on that stupid card. So I would even put that in a category like I've talked about before. The Copter at 3 toughness was just over the top, was just too much. So a couple 7s, a couple 6s here. 4, it's cool the combo exists, but answers are so bad it feels like you can never catch up. That's from Jim. I completely agree with Jim Castle here. And a couple 5s. Wow, someone actually does give it a 9. Because, like, what about stuff like Panharmonicon? And they're cute. I think that given the right player and the right matchups, they can be cute. But I don't think defining off a couple like Grand Prix, like a 1 top 8 Grand Prix, off of a very, very, very capable player is very representative of how well a deck actually works. Mostly Panharmonicon decks don't work. They get run over by vehicles a lot of the times, and it's still, you use it against an Emrakul, Emrakul or Green Black Delirium, either one, the Marvel or that, and it's over easy. So Huey gives it a 2, one of the worst in years. Few people do like it, but still, I'd say the most consensus, especially when you get up the higher on the pro level, give it very, very low scores. So I think I'm going to turn this over to the community now. I'm a half hour into this video. What do you think about this standard? Before I end the video, also, let's just look. Here's what I'm talking about. This is such an either Smuggler's Copter or Emrakul format with a very, very few exceptions to the rule. So you have Aetheric Marvel, which is now the most played deck because it does very well against both the White Blue Flash and Black Green Delirium. Marvel relies on Emrakul. You take Emrakul out of the picture, it still works. And I proved it. I proved it with Bruna. It still works. It is still a great deck. Emrakul makes it busted, and it just takes away that kind of decision-making fun format. Then we have White Blue Flash. Smuggler's Copter does not need... If you look at this list, let's just pull up this list. What is the one card that just doesn't look like it fits? To me, it's the Smuggler's Copter. We have like a bunch of Flash tempo-based cards, and there's a Smuggler's Copter, an aggressive like 3/3 flyer mixed in with it that really just turns all of these cards into just insanely good cards. I think the Smuggler's Copter would even be better than like a Sword of War and Peace here in these type of, at least Sword of War and Peace they'd have to take another turn to really get it online. And then there's a lot of easier ways, in my opinion, even to deal with those type of cards than the Smuggler's Copter. So yeah, it's insane the power level you get off Smuggler's Copter. That's the one out of place card in my opinion. So Modern Vehicles, of course, is a deck that completely revolves around the Smuggler's Copter. The Smuggler's Copter is, of course, your best 2-drop and the Scrappy Scrounger, but if the Smuggler's Copter did not exist, I think this deck would still work. It gets busted with the Smuggler's Copter. It has alternatives if not. Then on the red-black aggro, this is one where I think that the Smuggler's Copter definitely is the key card, and it wants to be in here. This is the strategy that absolutely benefits the most from a Smuggler's Copter, and where it should only really exist. Like this is, I think of it as a 1/1 or a 2/1 flyer, this is the only deck that would really want it, and some of these other decks would not. And then we have kind of the next category to be the Torrential Gearhulks. Those are starting to get a little bit more play because they do very decent against the big three. I think their worst matchup, correct me if I'm wrong, I've never really played many of these matchups, would be the White Blue Flash, just so the tempo is very good with the White Blue Flash. But all of these can easily beat like the Dynavolt Tower or the Jeskai Control type matchups. If you go down even further, the White Blue Aggro is just another, it's just a little more aggressive version of the White Blue Flash. It curves out easier. Then we have another card, the Green Red Energy, where it does not use the Smuggler's Copter. Finally, there's one thing, but this deck does not perform consistently. People refer to it as the Infective Standard. It's easy to shut down. It's not the greatest versus both UI Flash and Green Black Delirium. So, I mean, this strategy might actually be a lot better if there were decks that were more efficient at even pushing through than this sort of strategy. And then we have, after this point, it just gets really, really low, like White Blue Panharmonicon. This one actually does use the Smuggler's Copter because it's still a great way just to upgrade your Glint Nest Cranes if you're running the Glint Nest Cranes, or in this case, it's a great way just to upgrade your Pilgrim's Eyes and your Thraben Inspectors, or even your Reflector Mages. It's a way to give them aggressive action. So that just shows you the problem of a card when a Panharmonicon deck is using it. And then the Black-Green Delirium aggro is utilizing Smuggler's Copter instead of Emrakul for this strategy. This one's just trying to kill your opponent quickly with Verdurous Gearhulks and the Grim Flayers with Smuggler's Copter. But again, Smuggler's Copter is a great way to get Delirium online. It's surprising why they just don't throw a couple Emrakuls in the sideboard and then shift over to the more black-green regular Delirium. So again, out of all of these decks here, which have 88, 85, 43, 35, 28, 23, and then even on the low end, we have a whopping few red-blue control-based decks or red-blue tempo-based decks that do not use either one of those decks. We even go on the sideboard, and a lot of these decks do utilize either the Smuggler's Copter or the Emrakul. What's this blue-green deck? Is there actually a blue-green deck that's Oh, never mind. 4 Energicals in this blue-green deck. It's an Aetherworks Marvel deck. Nothing to see here. Just another Aetherworks Marvel that just tries to add a lot quicker energy with Thriving Turtles and Sage. This is the old school one. This is like the very first Aetherworks Marvel decks that existed when the format was brand new. So anywho, we've gone on a long 35-minute rant kind of with the format. I thought that was a pretty cool question. So you can tweet at @SamStod if you have your own response to this, or you can just comment in this video. And I want to see the consensus of kind of the rogue brewers. I mean, if you're looking at rogue deck builder, I assume that you're more of a Johnny type, or at least more of a synergy player or a creative player. And I think pros would actually like this type of format. They usually do like to find. I know that a lot of pros that I spoke to, they love the pack rank Mutavault, and I absolutely hated that format just because it was a clear winner. They knew exactly what they're doing. It was easy for them to become very proficient with that strategy. And so, like, the more skilled you were, the easier it was to stay consistent in those top 8 finishes at the various Grand Prix. So anywho, I hope you enjoyed this video. This has been Kevin with RogueDeckBuilder.com. Thanks for watching.